Jake stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, Emily's words still echoing in his mind. "You'll never be first in my life. My family always comes first." 10 years of marriage, and he'd never heard such brutal honesty from her lips. It started as a simple discussion about their anniversary. Jake had planned a surprise weekend getaway to the mountain cabin where they'd spent their honeymoon. He'd arranged everything: time off work, reservations at that French restaurant she loved, even bought her a diamond bracelet he'd been saving for months to afford. But Emily barely glanced at the itinerary before shaking her head. "I can't go. Mom needs me to help with Dad's birthday party that weekend. You know how important family is." "Emily, this is our 10th anniversary," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can't your sister help your mom for once?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "My family needs me, Jake. Why can't you understand that? You're always so selfish about these things." Selfish? The word felt like a slap. Jake thought about the promotion he'd turned down because it required relocating. Emily had refused to move away from her parents. He remembered canceling their honeymoon extension when her brother needed help moving, the countless dinners interrupted by her mother's emergencies, the holidays always spent at her family's house, never with his aging father in Portland. "Yes, selfish," she continued, her voice cold. "Marriage means compromise, and sometimes you need to understand that you'll never be first in my life. My family always comes first." Something inside Jake shattered, not loudly but quietly, like ice cracking beneath the surface of a frozen lake. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. When did she become so dismissive? Or had she always been this way and he'd just been too blind, too eager to please, too desperate to be loved? That night, as Emily slept peacefully beside him, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about the dreams he'd buried, the master's degree he'd postponed indefinitely, the woodworking business he'd wanted to start, the trips he'd planned but never taken. He'd built his entire life around being Emily's husband, and she just admitted he wasn't even her priority. As dawnlight crept through the curtains, Jake made a decision that would change everything. Jake didn't announce his transformation. He simply started living differently. Monday morning, he stopped at his boss's office. "About that senior project manager position in Seattle, is it still available?" His boss, David, looked surprised. "I thought you said your wife wouldn't relocate." "That's no longer a consideration. I'm interested if the offer still stands." By Wednesday, he had the job. By Friday, he'd signed a lease for a studio apartment in Seattle for weekdays, planning to return home only on weekends. He didn't ask Emily's permission. He simply informed her over dinner. "You did what?" Emily's fork clattered against her plate. "Without even discussing it with me?" "I'm discussing it now," Jake said, taking a sip of wine. "I start in 2 weeks." "This is ridiculous, Jake. You can't just make major decisions without what? Without considering your family's needs?" "You're right, I didn't. For the first time in 10 years, I made a decision based solely on what's best for me." Emily's face flushed. "You're being petty because of one argument." "No," Jake said quietly. "I'm being honest because of one truth you finally admitted. You told me I'd never be first, Emily. I'm simply accepting that and adjusting accordingly." The following weeks brought more changes. Jake enrolled in evening business courses he'd always wanted to take. He reconnected with old friends Emily had found too immature, college buddies who still played poker and watched football. He joined a gym and started working with a personal trainer named Melissa, a vibrant woman with an infectious laugh who pushed him harder than he'd pushed himself in years. His body began to change. His shoulders broadened, his waist tightened. But more than his physique, his confidence transformed. He walked taller, smiled more easily, spoke with newfound assertiveness. Emily noticed. How could she not? The man who'd always been available, always waiting, always accommodating, was suddenly busy, focused elsewhere. "You're never home anymore," she complained one evening when he packed for Seattle. "I'm home every weekend," Jake corrected. "That's more than you can say about being present in our marriage." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jake zipped his bag and turned to face her. "When was the last time you asked about my day, Emily? My dreams, my feelings? When was the last time you chose me over your mother's unnecessary drama?" She opened her mouth and closed it. They both knew the answer. In Seattle, Jake discovered a version of himself he'd forgotten existed. The passionate, ambitious man Emily had fallen for in college was returning,
But this time, he wouldn't dim his light for anyone. And Emily was about to realize what she'd taken for granted. 3 months into Jake's new arrangement, Emily found herself staring at her phone more than she'd care to admit, waiting for texts that came less frequently, calls that grew shorter and more perfunctory. "Working late tonight," his message read. "Don't wait up." It was Friday, their night. Jake used to rush home from work on Fridays, usually with flowers or her favorite takeout. Now he was choosing to stay in Seattle for the weekend, again. Emily drove to her mother's house, needing to vent, but for the first time, she found her mother's sympathy lacking. "You told him he wasn't your priority, Emily. What did you expect?" "I didn't mean it like that. Family is important. And so is your husband. Your father and I raised you to value family. But Jake is your family too. We've watched you take him for granted for years, sweetheart. Maybe this is your wake-up call." Emily left feeling unsettled. She scrolled through Facebook that night and stopped at a photo posted by Melissa, Jake's trainer. It showed a group from the gym at a charity 5K. And there was Jake, fit and smiling, his arm casually draped around Melissa's shoulders among other team members. Melissa's caption read, "Best running crew ever. #SundayFunday." Jealousy flared hot in Emily's chest. When had Jake run a 5K? Since when did he have a running crew? And who was this woman touching my husband? She called immediately. Jake answered on the fourth ring, breathing slightly heavy. "Hey, what's up? I'm just finishing a run. I saw a photo you were with that trainer." "Melissa? Yeah, a group of us from the gym did a charity race. It was fun." "You didn't tell me." A pause. "You didn't ask. Besides, you were at your parents' house all day Sunday as usual." Jake, I need to go. We're grabbing brunch. I'll call you later." He hung up before she could respond. Emily stared at her phone in disbelief. Jake had never cut her off before, never prioritized brunch with friends over her concerns. That evening, driven by suspicion and something she wouldn't name as insecurity, Emily drove the 3 hours to Seattle. She had a key to Jake's apartment, but had never used it, respecting his space. She arrived at 9 p.m. and let herself in quietly. The apartment was neat, masculine, filled with Jake's woodworking projects, half-finished furniture pieces that showed real talent. She'd never known he'd actually pursued this hobby. How many other things had she missed? Jake came out of the bathroom in a towel, startled. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to surprise you." She tried to sound playful, but her eyes were already searching the space for evidence of what exactly? "You should have called," Jake said, his tone cool. He walked to his dresser, completely comfortable in his transformed body, and pulled on clothes without urgency or embarrassment. "Since when do I need an appointment to see my husband?" Jake turned to face her. "Since you made it clear I'm not your priority, Emily, this works both ways. You can't ignore me 90% of the time and then demand my attention when it suits you."
Emily spent that night in Jake's apartment, but the distance between them was wider than the physical space in his bed. He was polite but distant, treating her more like a house guest than his wife. Saturday morning, Jake's phone buzzed repeatedly during breakfast. Emily watched him smile at the screen, a genuine, warm smile she hadn't seen directed at her in months. "Who's texting you?" she asked, hating how suspicious she sounded. "Melissa. We're supposed to meet the group at Pike Place Market for lunch. You're welcome to come if you want." Emily did want, needed, to see this woman who'd captured so much of her husband's attention. But as they walked through the bustling market, she realized Melissa wasn't the threat. The threat was the entire life Jake had built without her. Melissa was warm and friendly, introducing Emily to the group. 4 other gym members, 2 men and 2 women, all fit and laughing and clearly close friends. They welcomed her easily, but Emily felt like an outsider looking into Jake's world. She watched him interact with them, animated and engaged in a way he never was at her family gatherings. He debated politics with Tom, laughed at Sarah's terrible jokes, and offered genuine advice when Marcus mentioned work troubles. This was the Jake from college, passionate, opinionated, alive. "Your husband's amazing," Melissa said, pulling Emily aside while the others argued about where to eat lunch. "He's been such a positive force in our group. Honestly, we all adore him." "I know," Emily said automatically, but the words felt hollow. Did she know? When had she last truly seen Jake, not as the accommodating husband who fit into her life, but as the complex, interesting man he actually was. That night, back at the apartment, Emily initiated intimacy for the first time in months. But Jake's response was measured, almost detached. He touched her body with technical precision, but none of the passion she'd taken for granted in their early years. Afterwards, as they lay in the darkness, Emily whispered, "I miss you." "I'm right here," Jake replied. "No, you're not. Not really." She turned to face him. "Jake, I'm sorry about what I said, about taking you for granted, about Emily." His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not doing this for an apology. I'm doing this because I finally realized I deserve to be someone's priority. And if I'm not yours, then I need to at least be my own." "I want to fix this," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Then you need to understand something," Jake said, sitting up and turning on the bedside lamp. "This isn't about one comment or one weekend. This is about 10 years of patterns. Your mother's emergencies that always interrupted our plans. Your refusal to move from my career. Your dismissal of my dreams and hobbies. Your family getting every holiday, every weekend, every ounce of your energy, while I got the leftovers." Emily flinched at each truth. "I love you," Jake continued, "but I won't go back to being invisible in my own marriage. If you want this to work, real changes have to happen. And they have to be your choice, not guilt or fear of losing me." The following weeks forced Emily to confront uncomfortable truths. She noticed patterns she'd been blind to, her mother calling daily with trivial concerns, her automatic prioritization of family events over couple time, her dismissal of Jake's interests as less important than her own. She started therapy, alone at first, then couples counseling that Jake agreed to attend via video from Seattle. The therapist asked questions that made Emily squirm. "When was the last time you sacrificed something important for Jake's happiness?" Emily couldn't remember. "Do you believe healthy marriage requires two people prioritizing each other equally?" Emily realized she'd never truly believed that. "What frightens you about Jake's independence? That he might not need her anymore. That he might realize he's happier without her." The breakthrough came during a session where the therapist asked Jake, "What would make you want to fully invest in this marriage again?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, feeling like I matter, not just as a support system for Emily's life, but as someone whose dreams, feelings, and needs are equally important. Emily went home that night and did something she hadn't done in years. She really thought about what Jake wanted. Not what she thought he should want, but what he'd actually expressed wanting. She calls her mother. "I need to set some boundaries." Her mother was surprisingly understanding. "Your father and I wondered when you'd figure this out. We love you, Emily, but we raised you to have your own family. Jake should have been your priority all along." Emily started making changes. She declined her mother's request to help with a cousin's baby shower and suggested her sister step up instead. She researched woodworking classes and enrolled both of them in a weekend course in Seattle. She read books on emotional intelligence and partnership. But more importantly, she started asking questions about Jake's day, his projects, his feelings, his dreams. 3 months later, on their anniversary, Emily drove to Seattle, but this time she'd planned ahead. She'd booked that French restaurant Jake had wanted. She wore the dress he'd always loved, and she brought something else. Printed documents. "What's this?" Jake asked as they sat down to dinner. "A job application for a senior marketing position at a firm in Seattle. I had 3 interviews this week. They offered me the job today." Jake stared at her. "You'd move here?" "I'd move anywhere for us," Emily said, her voice steady. "I've spent 10 years asking you to accommodate my life. It's time I built our life together, as equals, as partners, if you'll still have me." Jake's eyes glistened. "Emily." "I'm not the same woman who said you'll never be first," she interrupted. "And I don't want to be her. I want to be the woman who chooses you every day, who celebrates your successes, who supports your dreams, who makes you feel valued and loved and prioritized." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "That's all I ever wanted."
Their marriage didn't magically heal overnight. Trust had to be rebuilt, patterns had to be broken, new dynamics had to be established. But for the first time in years, they were building something together, a partnership where both people mattered equally. 6 months later, they moved into a house in Seattle together. Emily maintained boundaries with her family, visiting monthly instead of weekly. Jake continued pursuing his woodworking, now teaching classes on weekends. They made decisions together, compromised genuinely, and protected their relationship as their top priority. One evening, as they finished building a dining table together, Emily's first major woodworking project, she looked at Jake and said, "You're first in my life now. Always." Jake smiled and kissed her forehead. "And you're first in mine. That's how it should have always been." They both learned the hardest lesson. You can't have a real marriage when one person is playing a supporting role in someone else's life story. True partnership requires two people choosing each other every single day above all others. And finally, they were both making that choice.